Howdy, howdy, everybody out there in YouTube land. Welcome back to my little digital slice of the grand land of Olean. So today I am projecting my voice across the studio because in Chapter 8, we're going to be talking about your voice. Now, before we get started, I just want to let you know. So some people carry a lucky rabbit's foot, or some people might even have a four-leaf clover. I have a magic 8 ball that I keep in my wallet. So now that we've got that out of the way, let's go ahead and get started with Chapter 8. I love it. So recently somebody said that was one of their favorite things that I do. Uh, and why not? Why not? So I did it for you again here today. So now that we got everything set up, let's go ahead and jump into the chapter. I do apologize for yesterday. I do typically take one day off, and I've decided it's Sunday, not for any other reason than that's like the day that I can do stuff with the kids and stuff. So, but yesterday I had internet technical problems with the internet, so that didn't happen. So I do apologize. It is going up today at 4 o'clock, and then you'll get Chapter 8 as well, which this is a little bit longer than yesterday's chapter. So let's jump into it. Here we go. Chapter 8, Your Voice. My formula for success. Rise early, work late, strike oil. J. Paul Getty. Yes, JP. Luck plays a considerable role in the success of a performer. For just one example, where your mom happened to pop you out and grow you up makes a difference because you will sound like your neighbors. That may be fortuitous, or it may be unfortunate. Some of us have naturally pleasing voices and some don't. An off-putting accent or a whiny voice or too slow or too fast speech pattern all present obstacles that must first be recognized and then modified. Careful analysis of your videoed presentation is again the first step. Go ahead and let me know down below whether or not my initial voice is something that is enjoyable to you or not, and try to be hypercritical based on what we're learning here in the book. So if you comment at the beginning of the video, let me know why you don't like it. And then if you stick around until the end, let me know what you've learned along the way and how you can apply that to be a helpful critic for what we do here on the channel. My favorite voice trick. Here's an exercise to illustrate a supremely practical and important technique I learned back in my speech major days. We'll use, here, let's go ahead and switch over here, partially because, hello, yep, there you go. Okay, is my video camera not on? I do apologize. That can sometimes happen. I wanted to have the camera ready to go so that you guys can see what I'm reading, for those of you who might not be able to hear me. Magic. There we go. Perfect. Okay. So now I don't know if it's going to be big enough. Might be able to zoom in a little bit for you. Well, that's the best I got for you. Hopefully it's not blurry. But either way, my favorite voice trick. We'll do our best here. If you can follow along, great. If not, join our book-sponsored giveaway. I have another book. We just need people to donate so that we can give it away. Here we go. Here's an exercise to illustrate a supremely practical and important technique I learned back in my speech major days. We'll use words that appear in John Northern Hilliard's classic book, Greater Magic. Below, you'll see a lightly edited version of a script from the trick, The Problem of the Three Coins, which, as Hilliard writes, is exactly as presented by the well-known mentalist Mahendra, who in private life is Mr. Frank B. Sterling. Read the following paragraph. Don't be concerned with the content or grammar. This is apparently what played well in the 1930s and 40s. Then read it again, out loud. Make an effort to hear yourself as you speak and try to remember what you heard. Being a mentalist, you expect me to read your minds. Of course, I make no pretension to supernatural power, and I do not claim actually to read your mind unless I can get your mind thinking along the lines I wish. In other words, I must make your mind susceptible to my own mental impulses. For example, ask me to tell you what you are thinking of at this moment, and I cannot tell you. No person can do that. Anyone who tells you he can read your mind under such circumstances is a fraud. I do not say it never will be done, but if you think along certain lines, it is true that I may be able to reveal your thoughts. To do this, I shall use what psychologists call the principle of associated thought ideas. Perhaps the simplest form of the experiment is with money. People have no trouble in associating ideas with money. Finished reading? You took the lazy way out and didn't really read it a second time aloud, did you? See that? I am a mentalist. Exclamation point! Now, of course, I was already reading it out loud, so yeah. Whether you truly read the lines out loud or just to yourself, chances are you paused at the commas and periods just as you were taught to do in elementary school. That's fine for everyday life, but not so fine for the entertainer. Our goal is to stand apart from the ordinary and to be more interesting than the average Joe. You increase your audience's interest in your spoken words by using that great tip I picked up in college. Ignore punctuation! Exclamation point! Which is actually kind of fascinating because I did read it as if I were projecting for the purpose of reading. So, exactly what he was talking about, I'm really curious to see where he's going to go from here. Ignore most of the punctuation provides two benefits. First, it makes you sound more natural, more conversational. No human converses with friends in perfectly punctuated sentences and paragraphs. Your spectators are your friends, or will soon become your friends, we hope. If you speak the way you were taught to read aloud, you will not sound natural. You will sound as though you are reading. Second, by inserting unexpected pauses, you break the normal patterns people expect, and that simple ruse makes you more interesting. Predictability is poison! Hot pooey! Exclamation point! Predictability in anything we do becomes boring. As entertainers, we seek to continually surprise our viewers in ways big and small, and changing expected speech patterns is one small way to help maintain interest. I tried it out there a little bit. We'll see how that goes. I don't know whether they do it consciously or not, but I can tell you that all leading news broadcasters ignore punctuation as they recite the words they read off the teleprompter. Not with every sentence, but most. Prove it to yourself by listening to them and picturing the written sentences as they speak. And certainly, actors learn to speak in a manner that sounds like real life speech. Now let's get to the type of exercise I was taught when I was a speech and drama major in college. Below, you will find the same pattern, but this time presented with a different speech pattern, brought about by ignoring much of the written punctuation. Some points to keep in mind as you read. These may not be the pauses that fit your style. They work for me, but only trial and error will produce the correct format level for you. Comfort level. Wow, I need to get my eyes checked today. Or maybe tomorrow. We'll see. Uh, you may find it difficult to say these lines as you see them. That's to be expected. It takes some work. It's called rehearsal. You will not feel comfortable doing it at first. If you prefer, think of this exercise as learning a new sleight! Exclamation point. Many of the pauses, as indicated by the line breaks, will be quick, almost imperceptible, perhaps accompanied by a tilt of the head, a raised eyebrow, a hand gesture, or an inhalation. And remember, this is only a learning exercise to help you break lifelong patterns. These are not your words. They are someone else's words for a routine you will probably never perform. Forget about the actual words. Just go with the flow of it and have fun with it. After you read through it once or twice, proceed to the next section where you will learn the next equally important step in this technique. Being a mentalist, you expect me to read your minds. Of course, I make no pretension to supernatural power, and I do not claim actually to read your mind, unless I can get your mind thinking along the lines I wish. In other words, I must make your mind susceptible to my own mental impulses. For example, Ask me to tell you what you are thinking at this moment, and I cannot tell you. No person can do that. Anyone who tells you he can read your mind under such circumstances is a fraud. I do not say it never will be done. But if you think along certain lines, it is true that I may be able to reveal your thoughts. To do this, I shall use what psychologists call the principle of associated thought ideas. Perhaps the simplest form of the experiment is with money. People have no trouble in associating ideas with money. After you've decided where your pauses will be, your next step is to decide where you are going to vocally add emphasis. Don't do this in your head. Mark the relevant places on your script. Take out a pencil and underline what you think are the key words. Then read it aloud, after which you will undoubtedly make changes. Do not skip this vital step. By consciously calling your attention to specific words in your script, you reduce the need to think about showmanship later on. The underlines you will find do the thinking for you. Being a mentalist, you expect me to read your minds. Of course, I make no pretensions to supernatural power, and I do not claim actually to read your mind, unless I can get your mind thinking along the lines I wish. In other words, I must make your mind susceptible to my own mental impulses. For example, ask me to tell you what you are thinking of at this moment, and I cannot tell you. No person can do that. Anyone who tells you he can read your mind under such circumstances is a fraud. I do not say it never will be done, but if you think along certain lines, it is true that I may be able to reveal your thoughts. To do this, I shall use what psychologists call the principle of associated thought ideas. People have, perhaps the simplest form of the experiment is with money. People have no trouble in associating ideas with money. So we kind of did that the first time to try to preemptively, try that out with the first reading. And then with the underlines in the second one, because the second script has underlines to it, I can really start to feel those breaks and pauses with those words. And it's not always where and what you think it'll be, because sometimes it's like the word no, but other times it's fraud. It's sometimes it's may, sometimes it's thinking, sometimes it's your instead of mine. So there's a lot of things that could go into that. Finally, you put it all down in a condensed format using slashes or ellipses to indicate your own personalized punctuation. Being a mentalist, you expect me to read your mind. Of course, I make no pretensions to supernatural power, and I do not claim actually to read your mind, unless I can get your mind thinking along the lines I wish. In other words, I must make your mind susceptible to my own mental impulses. For example, ask me to tell you what you are thinking of at this moment, and I cannot tell you. No person can do that. Anyone who tells you he can read your mind under such circumstances is a fraud. I do not say it never will be done. But if you think along certain lines, it is true that I may be able to reveal your thoughts. To do this, I shall use what psychologists call the principle of associated thought ideas. Perhaps the simplest form of the experiment is with money. People have no trouble in associating ideas with money. Again, this is a learning exercise, one which is difficult to translate onto paper, and it probably did not feel comfortable for you. I don't remember specifically, but I imagine it felt equally strange to me when I was taught this technique back in Hofstra University. It will feel much more comfortable when the words are your own. What I can tell you with certainty is that this works for me powerfully. So yeah, there was definitely some discomfort with this change up because your mind wants to focus on reading, which is another thing that we're trying to work on here, because performance is different than practice. It's different than reading. It's different than you're projecting in a different way. So you really want to learn these little nuanced tricks to being able to isolate what's important And by having this script, like he said, it can really help down the line because you're cutting out all of the extra fluff and worry about having to think about stuff. You're just performing something that you've already performed 100 times. Then you really can learn some of the important stuff about where to pause and where to stand and where to look and what to do. And you're so confident and comfortable because you know what comes next. You're a mind reader. You're a fortune teller. You're magic. You're a magician. You can tell the future because you know what's coming next. You've already planned it. Change the emphasis to a different different syllable. That one definitely was uncomfortable. Closely aligned with the above exercise, ignore punctuation is change the emphasis. This is the technique I use to keep myself sounding fresh and in the moment. Some sections of my show contain words I have said in exactly the same order hundreds of times, consciously varying the placement of the pauses and particularly of the emphasized words. Forces me to stay alert. I don't lapse into a mental sluggishness, the common malady of successful performers who say the same thing night after night after night. This is I was just kind of touching base on this because I said this in a couple of videos back where I said that when you have a script like this, it doesn't mean that you can be complacent and lazy. What it means is you can focus on the audience so that you can be in the moment. So don't take a backseat because you're prepared. Take the initiative. To demonstrate, we'll use a chunk of patter from Chuck Hickok's eminently practical book, Mentalism Incorporated. These are his opening lines. If every words are subject to the dreariness of repetition, is our opening lines. Below you will see 3 versions of these 2 short sentences, each with the emphasis placed in different spots. In all 3 cases, you say the same thing, yet each delivers a slightly different message to the listeners. I'm delighted to be here today and have the opportunity to talk about and demonstrate some untapped powers of the human mind. My interest in the untapped powers of the mind can be traced back to something that happened to me on the day of my 10th birthday. I'm delighted to be here today and have the opportunity to talk about and demonstrate some untapped powers of the human mind. My interest in the untapped powers of the mind can be traced back to something that happened to me on the day of my 10th birthday. I'm delighted to be here today and have the opportunity to talk about and demonstrate some untapped powers of the human mind. My interest in the untapped powers of the mind can be traced back to something that happened to me on the day of my 10th birthday. If you don't perform on a regular basis, you may not appreciate the importance of this technique. But for those who sometimes feel they must grind out another show, this skill is invaluable for keeping your presentation garden fresh. So basically it's the same paragraph 3 times, and each time you're focusing on different words to emphasize. Talk in color, not black and white. When you view your video of yourself, what do you hear? Is your voice as flat as the road from Enid, Oklahoma to Paris, Texas? Or do your listeners get to enjoy some interesting verbal scenery with undiluted twist and dips? If you speak anytime during your performance, your voice must be considered with at least as much gravitas as any move, feint, or prop. Fortunately, you don't need to purchase any expensive book of secrets from a magic shop to learn how to turn your voice into the effective communication tool it must become. Help surround you. Just start listening analytically to professional listeners. One of the best sources for inspiration was the HBO TV show Deaf Poetry. If you think poetry is a sing-song recitation of rhyming lines or dry, dense phrases filled with obscure references, you've never seen this powerful show. The mostly young poets spew rage and humor, sarcasm and sensuality, history and contemporary issues with rarely matched passion and vocal intensity. Using only your voice, and to a lesser degree, went too far forward there, their bodies, they communicate an astounding range of emotions and personal bottom of my soul information, watch them learn the power of the spoken word. As an alternative source of inspiration, search for poetry slam videos. Though you may never approach the oral fever of the deaf poets, I actually cannot imagine any magician or mentalist sounding like them, but then I never could have imagined a David Blaine. Still, your goal is to vary your pitch, tone, volume, pacing. An entertainer's voice needs color. Watching old fashioned black and white television broadcasts was fine until color came along, and we realized that that was usually better. A college lecturer's voice needs merely to deliver information, the black and white picture. You are a delivery system for full rainbow spectrum emotion. As you view your video, look for opportunities where you can inject your warmth. Turn up the vocal intensity, pause for emphasis, lower the volume of dramatic effect, or otherwise use your voice to raise the impact level of your effects. And for my younger readers, please avoid the Valley Girl syndrome that has infected so much of our generation. The rising inflection at the end of a sentence, because that's like ineffective. And not a persuasive way of like talking. And it's kind of what's the word? Drawing a blank here. Infectious. So if you or contagious, that's the better word for it. When you start saying the word like, which in that case I'm merely pointing out that, but then when you start to think about it or not think about it, it starts to infect your speech patterns because then you start to say it more often. And I feel like can do that. Like what I mean? So just don't do that. And it's a filler word. So only use those filler words for the intended purposes or to make a point. But don't get into the habit or rhythm of it. You gotta get the words right. You talk with an accent. Everyone does. You may sound normal to your friends and neighbors, but travel to a different part of the country or another country and folks will know you're not from there. In most cases, that's fine, but not always. As a New Yorker, I had to make a concerted effort to talk slower when I performed in the southern parts of the U.S. Fortunately, I had friends down south who told me more than once, exclamation point, that I needed to slow down to be understood. Bigger problems, however, tend to occur when a performer appears in a different country, even one whose natives speak his or her language. Not only is the accent different, many words are as well. When, for example, a Brit appears in the States, they need. Did I just say Brit? Like it almost sounded like I fell into that accent from culturally when I said the word, which I did not intend to. It's almost just like a carryover in our culture. That's weird. Um, they need to be cognizant of words and phrases that should have been confiscated confiscated at customs. There will be puzzled looks when they mention the interval, intermission, or the stalls, orchestra seats, or any of hundreds of other words or phrases. The same caution obviously applies in reverse. It's actually something that's interesting that comics will use, or a performer might point out the distinction as an educational moment, but also as a part of comic relief. It can work in your favor, just don't be rude about it. Also, that's wrong. Here we go. And accents can have unintended consequences. In New York, I saw a UK performer repeatedly ask a woman on stage to be in touch with her memories. It was a wonderful mentalism routine. Expect that, except it says except that to this Yank's ears and to others, I'm sure, it sounded as though he was talking about her memories, which would lead to a completely different show. Also, just as some American accents sound harsh or uncultured to others, so too to the certain British accents. If you count 1, 2 free, or you ask your spectator to think of a number, you send a message to your audience about yourself. You may be fine with that message, but generally, if you know you have a strong regional accent, you just might be holding yourself back. Every major city has voice coaches to help you lessen your distinctive accent. And as one who studied voice and accents in college, I can tell you it's not terribly difficult. Then, too, there are the cultural differences. Another well known European performer asked the American on stage to separate two objects on the table by about 30 centimeters. Confused, the nice woman put a yard between the items. Half the audience laughed, half were equally clueless. Americans are metrically challenged. The solution is to rely on a trusted native friend who can either sit in the audience taking notes about linguistic missteps or can do the same watching a video of your show. Now, I just want to take a brief moment to talk about this as an important aspect of what I'm doing here. I do not read out loud very often. I have read in my head for years, or I've listened to things. So my vocal cords and my voice are not accustomed to saying these words. Even though I know the words, I get stumbled by them because I don't practice how to say them out loud. So it's important for me as a performer to practice speaking. So one of the best ways to do that is by reading from a book, such as Maximum Entertainment 2.0. Now, of course, you can get one of these books as well. All you got to do is donate through my super chats or my super thanks, and we will give away books forever. As long as it's in print, we will give it away. All we got to do is just be a book sponsor here on the channel. But practice with your voice. It's so very important because there's nothing like going out in public and you go to have a conversation with somebody and you stumble over certain words that you know because you've only heard them in your head. So make sure that you're practicing them by saying them out loud as well. Most of all, magicians who perform in their second or third language should seek assistance from natives. Hear the voices. Finally, open yourself up to inspiration. It's everywhere, freely available and close at hand. At your local library, haunt the audiobook section and learn why authors like Stephen King and John Grisham, John Grisham is one of my absolute favorites, demand that certain voice talent be featured when their books are turned into performances. Check out the work of readers, such as Michael Beck, who's read more than a dozen of John Grisham's novels for the audiobook trade, and Frank Mueller, who's done the same for Stephen King. While you're listening, ask yourself what makes these readers so successful. Their work is compelling, with nothing more than an author's words and their voices. Once you begin doing this, you'll be well on your way to taking your voice seriously. Special thanks, by the way, to the talented magician and mentalist Kent Axel, who voiced the audio version of the original Maximum Entertainment for Vanishing Ink. I'm pleased to report that he received universal praise for his work. Boom! Chapter 9 goes into language skills, and my final note on that chapter, there's a lot to unpack there. My final note on that is something that is interesting within the brain. Now, everybody's going to be a little bit different. Now, you notice that I stumble over certain words that are pretty easy because of my autocorrect feature in my brain. We all have an autocorrect feature, and that's how we process language. Sometimes I misread words because my brain tries to autocorrect it before I've read it. And I'm a New Yorker, just as he said, I think quickly too, apparently. So I think so quickly, and that's one of the things you got to slow down so that when you communicate effectively, even when you're reading words that aren't coming from your own head, but you should do this in general as well because you want to be able to communicate effectively, right? So you don't want something to happen where you are not communicating effectively. Now, I've just repeated myself there for a second. What that means is that the example that I use is the word was taking, and I said talking because I added an L, because I auto-corrected mid-read. Instead of slowing down and processing the word that was on the page, I autocorrected to make it faster. We do that in society. We do that. It's part of neurochemistry studies, neurologics, and all that. The interesting thing about that is that magicians can actually use that to their advantage, because one of the books that I've been listening to on audio uh, is Sleights in Mind, is a beautiful book by neuroscientists who basically learned magic and did research on magic to see how it works, how it affects our brains. And that auto completion is so important, because when I do a trick for you, I basically, in the context of that performance, I want you to autocomplete what's going to happen next, so that when you look back at it, you create your own version of what happened and you missed what I did completely. So we use that as part of our performance to trick your brain for entertainment purposes. And that's why we're reading from Maximum Entertainment 2.0, because that's what we want to do right here. Boom. Maximize the entertainment for you. So don't forget, and always remember, stay positive, stay active, and stay awesome. And hopefully, we see you in the next one. And don't forget to subscribe, because it really does help out the channel. And of course, check out the video that's just for you. Yeah, it's just for you. Ta-da!